What did police know about Julie?
Julie's mother reported that Julie was supposed to be picking her daughter up, and that was the last she'd heard from her.
She was leaving with a man named James. Nobody had ever heard of him.
He was stalking her, and so we told her, please don't be alone with him.
When I lifted that section, underneath was what appeared to be like a shallow grave.
How do you explain his behavior?
That was his way of separating himself from Julie's mess.
Hi, I'm Nancy O'Dell. Today's crime expose takes us to Austin, Texas, where a young mother left her home and was never seen again. Her sudden disappearance was out of character, as were the texts she sent, professing love for a new mystery man. If not for the efforts of her family and investigators, a killer might have eluded justice that the woman and her child deserved. The date was March the 26th, and 21-year-old Julie Ann Gonzalez had the day off and planned to meet with her family in Austin after she picked up her daughter. But for some reason, Julie never showed, and texts from her family went unanswered. The next day, Julie sent a curious text and announced that she was moving to Colorado. Julie's family was so concerned, they searched the neighborhood looking for her, and 2 days later, Julie's car was found abandoned in a Walgreens parking lot.
We had a very close relationship because Julie was a surprise coming into the family. Initially, we weren't expecting her arrival. And I was about 15 when she entered the world, so kind of got to grow up with her, see her grow over the years. She set goals for herself, and she always made sure that she accomplished those goals. She was very driven to be successful in her own way. She graduated when she was a junior because she started attending college at the same time she was in high school, and she did that. Even with Layla in tow, she was able to do what she set out to do.
I met Julie's mother with Julie's aunt, and they wanted to report Julie missing. Julie was supposed to be picking her daughter up. Julie's mother reported that Julie went to pick up her daughter, and that was the last she'd heard from her.
One thing that I did notice about her car, the passenger seat was pushed all the way back, like someone was laying in it, and that was not normal.
Officer Brooks learned that Julie was to pick up her daughter at her estranged husband's house, who lived 3 blocks away. The officer drove to speak with George De La Cruz, and Julie's family went as well. It was as if De La Cruz was expecting them. What was his demeanor like?
He came right outside and was completely cooperative. He said that when Julie came to pick up their daughter, that she just decided that he needed to keep her with him.
Told him that she was leaving for that weekend, and that if he could watch Layla, and she would get in contact with him when she returned. It was completely uncharacteristic of Julie to just leave so abruptly.
During their conversation, Officer Brooks noticed marks on De La Cruz's face.
While I was talking to George, I noticed that he had some what looked like fingernail scratches on his face. And as a father of young children myself, I pretty much just equated that to possible toddler scratches. I didn't think much of it at that moment. Toddlers have tiny little fingernails and they're razor sharp.
The Austin police officer asked to inspect De La Cruz's home and saw nothing out of place. In the backyard was a small shed. Looking inside, the officer observed newly cut plywood covered the floor. Officer Brooks lifted the plywood to see what it covered.
I looked down and it looked like about a 4 by 4 foot section of plywood had been cut out with maybe a circular saw. And so when I lifted that 4 by 4 foot section of plywood, underneath was what appeared to be like a shallow grave. It was about 2 feet wide and maybe a foot deep.
So how did he explain the hole under his shed?
He said that trough was digging to install plumbing, and that made no sense.
The officer wrapped up the inspection and left the premises. At this point, he didn't know what to make of Julie's disappearance.
Part of me still just believes that there has to be a logical explanation. We couldn't account for her, and just finding a car unattended and the owner of it is nowhere to be found, and all these behaviors are being described as uncharacteristic.
A missing persons report was submitted and forwarded to an Austin police detective. Meanwhile, Julie's mother, her aunt, and the rest of her family anxiously awaited some kind of word from her. The next day, she texted them and posted on her social media account a cryptic explanation. What was it she was trying to say to her family with the post and text?
The text messages were that she was tired of everything that was going on here, like in Austin, that she was leaving with a man named James who lived in Colorado. Nobody had ever heard of him, not her family, friends.
Odd as it was, police had nothing to suggest Julie was a victim of foul play. She was a missing person who they believed would eventually return. But her family knew Julie would never abandon her daughter in this way, and deep down, they suspected something was terribly wrong.
There had been some debit card transactions, Julie's debit card.
Austin police investigating a missing person report on Julie Ann Gonzalez hoped she would get in touch with her family and that the investigation could be resolved. Julie's family and boyfriend were stunned by her behavior that they knew to be completely out of character. They claimed she would never leave her daughter Layla or the new love in her life.
That Friday, she disappeared. Aaron, her boyfriend at the time, received a text. Julie stated that she was sorry, but she needed to break up with him. And we were just as shocked when he told us about it because I knew how madly in love she was with Aaron.
There was still a lot more elimination that had to be done before we actually focused on George. We had additional investigation to do. And it was imperative that we start eliminating people within Julie's circle of friends and family before we focused on any particular person. We still had to start at the beginning with everyone else.
Julie's family continued to press the police to look into her disappearance, since she wasn't responding to their texts or their calls.
I spoke to my sister, to Sandra, Julie's mom. I spoke to my son, Michael. I spoke to my mother. And we all could not get a hold of her. We reached out to her friends, to her boyfriend at the time, and no one could give us an answer. Nobody knew where she was. I was also told by APD that we had to wait 24 hours to file a missing persons report. So there wasn't much they could do. Their advice to us was just hope that she comes around or she shows up.
So even though 24 hours hadn't passed, were police concerned about the way Julie left her daughter and family?
After some time, of course, Julie hadn't returned. Certainly she would have returned for Layla, at least. And there was no signs of life activity either. This obviously became a concern, not only for the family, but for the missing persons unit involved in the investigation.
Investigators met with Julie's new boyfriend, Aaron. He described the last time he had seen his girlfriend. Aaron told police that Julie spent the night at his apartment and was there when he went to work. He hadn't seen her since that morning.
I spoke to his foreman, They verified he was there. He was there all day. Aaron volunteered to take a polygraph, which he passed without any problems. And I knew that Julie was in love with Aaron.
Investigators talked to everyone who had been in touch with Julie leading up to her disappearance. The interviews produced no new leads on her whereabouts. But then, police discovered activity on Julie's debit card the day she disappeared, and things heated up. When did the investigation take a turn?
The investigation started building when we discovered that there had been some debit card transactions with Julie's debit card at a local Walmart in South Austin, and then 2 different McDonald's locations. And certainly the texts, there was text activity on the 26th and the 27th with Julie's phone. There were continuous.
Police requested the closed-circuit footage from the Walmart and McDonald's, hoping to identify who had used Julie's debit card. And what did you discover?
We discovered a video segment right after the transactions were made of George with Layla. The video showed him walking out at Walmart with the items he had purchased. I don't believe that anyone confronted him with this information at the time. I believe shortly after that, homicide got involved. And naturally, once we start building evidence against someone, we're typically not going to reveal our cards, as it were.
Police now knew that Julie's estranged husband had used his wife's debit card the day she went missing. It was evidence that George De La Cruz knew more about Julie's disappearance than he let on. But police needed more.
He was stalking her, and so we told her, please don't be alone with him.
Austin police investigating the disappearance of Julie Ann Gonzalez began to look closely into her marriage to George De La Cruz. According to family and friends, it was not a match made in heaven, and Julie was firm in her resolve to end the marriage. Did Julie ever have any intention of reuniting with her husband?
At the time of Julie's disappearance, her only communication with him was about their daughter and support. Leading up to her disappearance, he was stalking her, and so we spoke to her and told her, please don't be alone with him.
Investigators subpoenaed the phone records for De La Cruz and Julia to track activity around the time she last texted her family and boyfriend. It was Julie's text and where they came from that grabbed their interest.
Digital forensic detectives mapped out Julie's cell phone activity. He also mapped out and overlaid it with George's whereabouts, and Julie's phone just seemed to be there where he was, with the exception of Julie herself.
The wheels of justice moved slowly, and investigators were careful to not tip their hand to George De La Cruz, but they continued to focus their efforts on him. In the midst of the investigation into his wife's disappearance, De La Cruz did something unusual. Did De La Cruz do something to increase your suspicion of him?
Julie had filed for divorce and tried, I think she was trying to have him sign the papers. George was refusing to do so. After Julie went missing, George finally signed the papers. In an odd sort of way, I think that was his way of separating himself from Julie's disappearance.
The papers first appeared to be circumstantial evidence, but now the case was focused entirely around Julie's estranged husband. So police revisited the home of De La Cruz, this time with a search warrant.
That's when I first saw the hole in the shed. My perception of it was it looked more like a grave, consistent with Julie's height and her physical stature. And the discovery of the transactions and the text messages and everything else certainly was something that had to be investigated further with additional resources. There was suspicion, obviously, at that point that there had been some foul play, and naturally they approached homicide.
3 years after Julia had disappeared, police finally arrested George De La Cruz and charged him with the murder of Julie Ann Gonzalez. While prosecutors prepared their case, Julie's husband was held in jail. And although he refused to speak to investigators, he had plenty to say to his cellmate. So what did the cellmate testify to?
George told him briefly that Julie had come over that morning. They had an argument, that he pushed her. She fell and hit her head. George panicked because he thought that eventually that would lead to some kind of domestic violence charges against him. He panicked and that he killed Julie there.
It was enough to convince a jury, and George De La Cruz was found guilty of the murder of Julie Ann Gonzalez.
George has always been number one suspect for me. Never have I ever doubted that it was George. I never thought anybody else.
When such a long investigation takes place, you can't help but feel a connection to their family members. There's a child involved in all this, and I think she deserves to know what happened to her mother. I think Julie's mother deserves to know what happened to her daughter.
The goal has always been to find Julie, not to convict George, but to find Julie. This isn't about George. It's about, I need to know where my daughter is.
De La Cruz's conviction was some comfort to her grieving family, but they still didn't have her body, and De La Cruz wasn't talking.
I was not going to let her be forgotten or not be found.
George De La Cruz was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his wife, Julie Ann Gonzalez.
We, the jury, find the defendant, George De La Cruz, guilty of the offense of murder.
However, he maintained his innocence and refused to speak with the police about where they might find the body of his child's mother.
She's somebody. She's not just a face in the crowd. She's a loved one. She's a mother. She's a daughter. She's a niece. She's a cousin. But I was not going to let her be forgotten.
Julie's cruel murder is compounded by a grieving family which is unable to honor her with a burial. Perhaps someday, Julie's daughter Layla will find out the answer to the question her father has refused to answer. Where is her mother? And now, it's time for today's Safety Spotlight. Julie Ann Gonzalez was a young mother-in-law who was tragically murdered by her estranged husband, George De La Cruz. Julie's family was aware that George was stalking her and was rightfully concerned for her safety. And while no advice can assure you that you will always be safe, if you or one of your loved ones is feeling threatened or being stalked, consider the following actions. Alter your daily patterns, such as changing your route to work, varying your schedule, or avoiding places where the stalker might expect to find you. Consider consulting law enforcement and inform friends, family, or neighbors about the situation so they can help monitor your safety and provide support. And lastly, contact organizations or support services that specialize in helping victims of stalking, such as the Victim Connect. Your safety and well-being should always be a top priority. I'm Nancy O'Dell. For all of us here at Crime Exposé, please join us next time and stay safe.